My name is Kathleen Tierney. I'm a sociologist. I am a professor in the Department of Sociology and the Institute of Behavioral Science at the University of Colorado Boulder, where I am also the director of the Natural Hazards Center. I have been involved in doing disaster research for most of my adult life, looking at the social and economic and political and cultural dimensions of hazards, disasters, and risk.
Wow. So you've been pretty much the person who's been orchestrating these conferences, the head of something that has become not only national but international. Can you talk a little bit about how this Natural Hazards Center started, and then how it's grown and where it's gone, and what your challenges have been?
The Natural Hazards Center was founded at the university in 1976 by the geographer Gilbert White, who was a very prominent geographer who was sort of an icon of hazard mitigation and understanding hazards from a societal point of view. The purpose of the center was then and still is to bridge the gap between what we know about the social dimensions of hazards and disasters and what is actually being applied out there in the real world. So the mission of the Natural Hazards Center is to make those connections through a variety of activities, including our newsletters, our library and information services, and our annual workshop.
Can you talk about who your partners are and how that is developed to where you really are the main entity in the United States and perhaps even the world in this capacity?
The Natural Hazards Center is funded by grants from the National Science Foundation, which is the agency in the U.S. government that sponsors basic research. It's also funded by a consortium of other agencies whose missions fall somewhere in the area of hazards and disasters. So some of those funders include the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, NOAA, and the United States Geological Survey. So the clearinghouse activities of the Natural Hazards Center, our information dissemination activities, are funded by those agencies. We have also an in-house research program where we have researchers and graduate students working on grants from separate agencies on a variety of different topics, and the center sponsors quick response research in the aftermath of disasters. We provide small grants to teams to go out into the field when disaster has occurred to collect perishable data.
And this is not only in Colorado, but all over the United States?
All over the United States, and we also fund international quick response research if we believe that the social science topics that are being looked at are important for us to know here in the U.S. So we look at lessons for the United States. Probably our two biggest quick response actions were following the terrorist attacks of September 11, 2001, and following Hurricane Katrina, where we sponsored about 28 different teams that looked at different aspects of the Katrina catastrophe.
You felt like over the years since this organization was born that that because of climate change and all that's going on in the world, that this is much more important and more on the focus of the entire society than it was before? Or has it been something like, how have you seen this organization and your work change over the last few decades?
When disaster research first started out as a field, it was a very, very tiny field that was dominated primarily by geographers and sociologists. And over time, over the 4 decades that the Natural Hazard Center has been in existence, we've really seen the field grow, both in terms of the disciplines that are involved, in terms of the topics that are being looked at, and in terms of the numbers. We got big increases, of course, following various natural disasters, events like the Loma Prieta earthquake in 1989, Hurricane Andrew in 1992, the Northridge earthquake in 1994, the Kobe earthquake in Japan in 1995, the terrorist attacks of September 11th, and then a very large increase in involvement and interest after Hurricane Katrina. And I think that Hurricane Katrina was really a watershed event in disaster research because it brought home to the entire country and to many professions the importance of understanding the societal dimensions of hazards, disasters, and risk.
So, first of all, with September 11th, I can imagine that your research and your team, the things applied, even though that wasn't considered a quote, natural disaster, it was a man-made incident. Was that already in your scope before, that you would be dealing with a terrorist event and the displacement in a place like New York City?
Sociologists who study disasters don't specialize in a particular type of disaster or even category of disaster. We have studied so-called natural disasters like hurricanes and tornadoes. We have studied technological disasters such as explosions and events like 3 Mile Island and the Exxon Valdez oil spill. And we have also studied terrorist events. At the time of the 9/11 terrorist attacks, I wasn't at the University of Colorado. I was a director at the Disaster Research Center at the University of Delaware, and the 9/11 attacks were occurring virtually in our backyard. And we immediately recognized that this was the kind of major disaster event that would be very much worth studying.
So with Katrina, it seemed like organizations like FEMA, whether it was from an external place where because of the media, but there were a lot of failures in infrastructure and system in immediate response and in recovery. Has your research been able to be implemented so those mistakes have been corrected, and can you have your scope of knowledge infiltrate FEMA's infrastructure in an effective way going forward?
Social scientists who study disasters are involved in getting research lessons into practice in a variety of ways. Following disasters, we have testified before Congress on the social dimensions of disasters and things that need to change. We are involved with agencies like FEMA in developing training and educational programs, both for on-the-job professionals and in institutions of higher education, such as universities, colleges, and community colleges. A lot of the curriculum that is offered in colleges and universities, as well as at FEMA's Emergency Management Institute, a lot of those curricula are based on research findings. We are heavily involved in writing textbooks that are used in courses, again, for emergency managers in training and people who are on the job. We write about lessons learned and provide guidance in a variety of different ways.
And in the event of another big disaster anywhere in the United States or the world, does somebody come to you and say, give us all you've got, help us now, or is that materials already available to them? Because it seems like you are the brain trust of what to do and how to do, and your research has been multifaceted, so it can apply to so many different situations. Do people or organizations come to you and say, okay, here's the next one, or do you go to them with researchers for future, to take that into the future?
We're seeing a change in how social scientists are integrated with responders in the context of disasters. Most of the time in the past, up until fairly recently, researchers went into the field as researchers. They were not involved in strategic decision making at all. They were there to observe what was going on, record what was going on, and stay in the background and watch. We are now seeing the advent of what some people refer to as strategic science, where scientists, including social scientists, are going to be put in advisory roles during actual disaster events. This is only beginning. There is a great deal of interest in it, and we will be seeing more of that in the future. But having said that, I still think that the main role of social science researchers in disasters is to be there to find out what is going on and to report later on what has gone on and why.
Mm-hmm. With regard to collection of data, with climate change, for example, we're getting to so many events that are unprecedented everywhere. So it seems like the historical data might not really apply to the data if you're thinking right now going forward, especially with weather events. How do you as a scientist make those adjustments in real time with something like climate change where everything's kind of gotten a little cattywampus?
Well, the new rule in thinking about the climate is that stationarity is dead. Data from the past is not necessarily a predictor of what the future is going to look like, and we know because the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change is telling us that we are going to be seeing more extremes. We expect to see more extremes. Also in the social science realm, stationarity is dead. For example, we thought we knew a lot about warning systems and warning responses. That knowledge was based on old-time linear models of crisis communication. In the era of social media, we are seeing a great deal of change there. So what we knew in the past about where people go for information and how they respond to warnings and so on may be different in the future. So the climate changes and society changes as well.
Climate change being a preeminent issue, and the natural disasters that seem to be following in its footsteps, why would the National Science Foundation funding be being reduced in this area versus enhanced?
I don't think that there's any great secret about why funding is being cut to some of the disciplines that are involved in climate change and some of the agencies that are involved in tracking the impacts of climate change. It has to do with the fact that Congress is dominated by the Republican Party, and that among leading figures in the Republican Party and in Congress, there is not an appetite for learning more about climate change. We see that at the state level in terms of governors and their treatment of climate change. We see it in Congress, and that is what's going on. Nonetheless, the federal government is able to move forward in a very decisive way on a lot of issues related to climate change through the president's ability to issue presidential directives and executive orders.
And is there more money available from private sector foundations, for example, that are tuning in to the issues going on that would not necessarily, like the Rockefeller Foundation in the Resilient Cities? Is there more of that kind of money available to the scientist?
What we're seeing happening now is an increased interest on the part of philanthropic organizations like the Rockefeller Foundation to weigh in on climate change adaptation and adaptation to environmental extremes in general. It's important to note, though, that this money does not go for basic research. It does not go for climate and environmental observation systems. It goes toward capacity building at the community level. So we are seeing a decline in support for the kind of basic science and observations that we need in order to figure out what's going on with the planet.
That must be frustrating. Okay, can you talk a little bit about this conference that, and there are two different entities. There's the workshops and the symposium, and these two organizations, and who has come for this? Who's here in general? Where are they coming from? What sectors of society are they coming from? And what is your vision for what are you trying to achieve?
The Natural Hazards Workshop is a 3-day-long series of events where what we try to do is we try to bring together representatives from academia, faculty and students, practitioners, local government officials, state government officials, federal government officials for 3 days of presentations and networking opportunities. We developed the program for the workshop by polling members of the community, our community, in the fall of every year, asking them what they would like to talk about at the workshop or topics that they would like to see covered at the workshop. We organized the workshop around keynote presentations, plenary presentations, usually on big issues, and breakout sessions on different topical areas that members of the community have told us are important to cover in the workshop. A main feature of the workshop is that we have long breaks and long lunches. The purpose of that is to enable extensive networking, enable people to get in touch with the people that they need to see while they're here, and the workshop is not a conference. People do not read papers. We do not allow PowerPoint in our concurrent sessions, our breakout sessions. The purpose is to inform, discuss, and network. The workshop itself is followed on by meetings for researchers where they do make research presentations and for practitioners represented by the Natural Hazards Mitigation Association.
And can you talk a little bit about how these two organizations, what their relationship is, and is it like a right hand and a left hand? Is there overlap in what you're doing? How can you see the relationship most serve the greater good?
The relationship between the Natural Hazards Center and the Natural Hazards Mitigation Association is a logical extension of the mission of the Natural Hazards Center, which is to turn research into practice, to bridge the gulf between ivory tower academicians and practitioners on the ground. This is the reason why the Hazard Center was originally founded, and this is, in other words, a continuation of our mission with the NHMA becoming formalized and growing. We see this as a very natural and productive partnership.
Nice. Wow.
Thank you.
You're so articulate. It will require zero editing, we'll put it that way. Is there anything else you would like to say, you would like people to know about this experience, this group, the work you're doing, or where we are in time and space?
Well, I think a lot of people, when they think about disasters, they think about geology and seismology for earthquakes, or hydrology and atmospheric science for hurricanes and for floods. They don't think about the societal dimensions. And I guess what I would like people to think about is the fact that there is a very large and growing community of social scientists out there who are looking at things that really matter to people, and that matter to the country, and that matter to the world. We're trying to find out about fundamental things like who is vulnerable to disasters, how that vulnerability is growing, how vulnerability is distributed across different groups within society, and what can be done to make individuals, households, businesses, and communities more resilient in the face of disasters.